then I guess trying to look back on my career with gratitude and go, well, I got to do some pretty cool things at the same time.
Very sad when a talented young player has his dreams taken away from him by injury, any injury, but particularly head injury. Of course, Aidan O'Driscoll in football over this side of the country is facing a similar thing at the moment and still coming to terms with that. And we wish Aidan O'Driscoll all the best in his attempts to stay involved. And we also wish Will Pukowski all the best in the rest of his endeavours, whatever he chooses to pursue for the rest of his life. Brilliant young cricketer, and very sad to see that taken away from him by concussion issues. Let's move on to something a little more cheery than that. Paul Hasleby, until a couple of weeks ago, was the only man to win 4 Glendinning Allen medals. He no longer is, but we still value his opinion very highly, and he joins us on the show now. Hayes, welcome.
Bloody Leespur, Duff Leespur. He didn't give Andrew Brayshaw a vote, did he? But I'm not dirty at all, but what a player that Caleb Sarong is. He did again on the weekend. He's amazing the way that he just keeps finding the footy. And I don't think I've seen a better player go through traffic and pick up a ball at speed below his knees.
He's very Lockie Neal-esque with the cleanness of his ball handling around stoppage, isn't he? He just one grab and then he appears to know where the exit is, where the option is, and he doesn't get it wrong too often.
Yeah, they're very similar, very, very clean. And you look at the accolades over time that Lockie Neal's got. So, I think he's on track right now. He's coming second in the coaches' votes. He'd probably have at least 6 votes in the Brownlow medal. It could be the year for Caleb Sarong if he keeps going this way and if teams continue to let him off the chain, because we've seen when James Jordan put some pressure in him what that could do. But if you leave him, he'll destroy you every single time.
Hey, let's start with West Coast, because it is a very serious situation, I think, that the Eagles face. You were at Fremantle in 2001 when you had a really tough year. You were a young player at Fremantle in 2001 in your second season in the AFL. You didn't win the first game until about round 18, I reckon. What advice would you give the Eagles in their current situation, having been through something like this 20 years ago?
It's a long year, but it's not long for the kids because there's so many guys getting their debut, getting opportunities, playing senior footy. So they feel pretty good about life. It's the guys at the other end. And I remember going back to my time, guys like Adrian Fletcher, Tony Modra, those players were sort of coming to their end. And it was a nightmare for them to deal with because they knew change was coming. So for those senior players like Cripps and McGovern and Kelly, they've just got to hang around and play their part. But it's difficult to do because, you're probably thinking about your own career in the back of your mind, whether you're going to be there next year. But somehow they've got to find a way to rock up week to week. And they'll have good weeks where they do get it right. And they'll have some really poor weeks like they did on the weekend where they just don't all have the same arousal levels in terms of trying to win the footy.
You've also coached, Hayes, and as a person who has coached, what does Andrew McWalter need most this weekend? If there's one thing he can fix this weekend, what is it?
I think it's just intensity around the ball. If you look at the midfield, let's try and win the footy. And I know, the midfield was totally outclassed on the weekend. I've said it a couple of times on my show. We're probably looking at the worst midfield the Eagles have ever had, but maybe the worst in the competition right now. When you look at all the players going through there, no Elliot Yeo, of course, but Tim Kelly's miles from the player that he was, and the rest are just kids. But if you can get something where you just got that intensity around the ball to either win it or win it back and chase and tackle, then you're half a chance. But they didn't have that on the weekend. They tried pretty hard to win it, but once it sort of left the source, the Giants were just on another level with their ball movement.
Oscar Allen, did you feel... What was your feeling about the club's handling of that? As I said to Gavin Bell, who was on the show a few minutes ago, it really bothered me that Oscar used the word ashamed during his press conference. It just felt like it struck completely the wrong tone and it didn't accurately affect or represent the events. I mean, sure, it's embarrassing when a captain gets caught out doing something like that, but we know these things happen all the time and it just doesn't come into the public's attention. How did you feel the club handled the whole Oscar Allen saga last week?
Well, first and foremost, I can sort of reflect on what Oscar's going through, that, as a player and you give your heart and soul to a football club, all he's ever wanted to do is captain that football club. And right now he's heartbroken. He's devastated that the club that he loves, I don't think deep down really wants to keep him because of the free agency compensation pick that is available if he does leave the football club. So, he would be emotional right now, and you could sense that throughout the week. And I certainly don't blame him being pushed to go and meet with Sam Mitchell. The timing of it, the public nature of it was all wrong. But, to be in his shoes right now, when I was offered a contract at Freo, when I wanted 2 years and they're only forthcoming with one, my family and myself at that time were devastated. So I feel for him. And then the way they rolled him out alongside John Worsfold, I thought was very average. And those words and the language used was just not required. I think it's a moving time in footy, and he just probably should have come out and protected himself. But I've also been around the PR battle when you're in that contract situation. Is the club's trying to roll out their PR, but sometimes you've got to do it for yourself. But in this occasion, it conflicts with the team and also highlights the difference between a winning team and a losing team. When you're losing, everything is magnified. When you're winning, it's totally different. And I think James Sicily came out and said it, that he would have no issue with it, but the difference is their team's winning at the moment.
Did Sam Mitchell, do you think, he has no duty of care to West Coast? He's the coach of Hawthorn. He's trying to build a list that he thinks can win a flag. That's fine. We all accept that. Did he have a duty of care to Oscar to take more care from his end of things to make sure that didn't spill into the public arena?
Only he knows, and only the management knows how that got into the public arena. So in the past, deals wouldn't have got done if you didn't keep it secret. So you had to be 100% confidential, and that gave you every chance to try and pry that player out. But as soon as it becomes public, then it becomes a lot more difficult. And you go back to Lachie Neale, who tried to get back to the Fremantle Dockers. But as soon as that came public, and I know Ryan Daniels sort of has some angst over this because he believes that if he didn't break that story, perhaps Lachie Neale comes back to the Fremantle Dockers. But I don't think in this day and age he's doing too much wrong. We've heard Adam Simpson say that he's met with 50 players. Every coach around the league is meeting with players at the moment. But, yeah, I think he'd be disappointed just for the fact that Oscar's had to go through the last week, which has been pretty tough for him.
We've asked you questions as a player. We've asked you questions as a coach. Let's try one as a list manager. Is it in West Coast's interest to let Oscar Allen go if the free agency compensation is the pick behind their first round pick? And is it possibly in their interest to let Harley Reid go too?
Yes, and yes, I think is my answer. I'm struggling to come up with a reason why Harley at the end of this year would say, yeah, I want to stay at the West Coast Eagles. When you look around the league, and he would have a lot of mates that are at clubs that are winning, playing in front of big crowds every single week at the MCG. And, to be fair, I just can't see how West Coast can really stump up the money for Harley Reid right now. Like, we're talking about $1.5 to $2 million. Would it be a wise investment right now to do that? And they're probably going to have the same argument in 2 years' time, in 5 years' time. So I think, they just need to go back to ground zero, get as much as they can right now. And the same applies for Jake Waterman. I think, they just need to go to the draft this year with picks, hopefully 2, 3, 4, 10, 18, 19, and give themselves every chance to rebuild, because I still think there's some tough times remaining in this year. And the longer it goes, the closer we get to more retirements at West Coast with McGovern, Yo, and also Cripps.
It's an interesting point you make. One of the interesting things that makes what you say even make a little bit more sense is that two of the players I think that are showing a bit at West Coast are Jack Williams and Archer Reid. And even if you lose Oscar and you lose Jake Waterman, those guys will be a year older next year, a year further into their careers, and potentially capable of stumping up in the key forward posts.
Yeah, he's been great, hasn't he, Archer Reid in particular? He's not getting the big bags just yet, but you can just tell by a player when they're young. And I was probably a bit critical of the coach giving him a go in round one, because I thought Jack Williams was a bit unlucky from what I saw last year. But the coach, McQualter, he's nailed this one. This kid can play, and he obviously saw a lot through the pre-season. So, yeah, if you look at Oscar right now, I think he really misses Jake. And I think that shows you that, he's probably not the number one forward. He's probably a bit suited to have those players around him. And we'll see how he goes with those two, and also Archer Reid and maybe Jack Williams in the same forward line this weekend.
Sandy Brock, it was a big call by Andrew McQualter to play him on Jesse Hogan last week. How did he go? Was it a call you would have made as a coach?
sometimes you get it wrong as a coach, and you've got to put your hand up and you've got to own it. And I think Andrew McQualter's got to own it this week, particularly when the messaging was around the run and carry from the back half. Like, I don't mind if you want to drop a player and send a message, and I'm talking about Harry Edwards here. So drop him, send the message, but when the message becomes convoluted, that it becomes about going a bit small, it didn't make sense for me to lose your centre-half back in McGovern and then your full-back that started the season in the same week. So he was thrown to the Wolves, no doubt about that, Sandy Brock, but he looked okay. He had some good moments, and we know Jesse at his best. He's very hard to stop, and he's going to get a hold of some of the best full-backs in the competition. But I think Sandy's probably more suited in the early part of his career to be the third tall to come over the top and help, because he looked quite athletic. He got in really good positions, but just that final half a second when the ball was arriving towards Jesse Hogan, just a little bit of work required on that.
Was Fremantle's win at the weekend the bravest win you've seen them have under Justin Longmuir?
Probably under Justin Longmuir. I wouldn't say it was overly brave. I was probably a little bit critical. I know they lost a couple, but, to lose two players in the last quarter, it's not that big a deal in modern day footy. When you lose 3 and 4 early in the game, absolutely, that's super brave. But yes, they missed Luke Jackson, but Carl Warner came on and replaced Wagner, so they were only 2 down for the last quarter. I probably felt Duff they went into their shell a little bit too early,
a little bit too soon
in that last quarter. Yeah, it was just defend down the line, and they were set up behind the ball, and they played pretty defensive. Now, to be in their shoes, they've been in that position a few times and they've lost, so they just wanted to lock it down and get the win. But by doing that, they did invite the Bulldogs to have a good crack, and they were lucky that they got away towards the end, and it was because of their defence that held up, because of the numbers behind the ball. There were some moments where I think Justin Longmuir would have been happy with the scenario training that they would have been doing to try and improve the last part of their game, but I was impressed. Particularly the first quarter. I think they probably won the game in the first quarter. Everybody talks about the second quarter, the 5 or 6 goal blitz. But it was their ability not to shut up shop in the first quarter to keep on attacking. Now, Fremantle are normally a hesitant first quarter team, but they just sort of suck out the environment and they maintain possession of the footy. And normally when you're under the pump, that's what you do. You chip it around, own the footy. But they didn't. They actually kept on going, threw some punches, and they're able to score 4 goals from their 8 entries in the first quarter. That's where they won it for me.
Yeah, good call, I think, on that. That's certainly... I love the fact that they've got some high IQ players forward to centre now as well, and the difference that makes. Murphy Reid, one of them, even though he's only a kid. Isaiah Dudley, one of them, even though he's played the 2 games. And obviously Shea Bolton in there as well, and his brilliance and his ability to create a full chance out of a half chance. I said on the show yesterday that I think that maybe if I was a list manager, that would change my recruiting priorities, and I'd be all chips in for Chad Warner as opposed to Cozzy Pickett, because you now do have that IQ and that brilliance ahead of the ball in attack. What are your thoughts on that?
It's an interesting one with list management. So, West Coast obviously had done a deal with Baker last year and promised him that they would get to the football club, and that's why West Coast were forced to pay such a high price. So can you go back on your word as a list manager if you've already, given your word to that player? We're talking about Cozzy Pickett in this situation. Do you think the club can do that easily, or do you have to honour it, given you've put Kasai under a fair bit of scrutiny and pressure already? What's your thoughts on that, Duff?
It's a good question. It probably depends on what sort of undertakings they have given, and obviously, there's talk around that Fremantle have been very keen and have chased him. There's also suggestions that Cozzy has sort of like floated the idea with Melbourne and waited to see what their response would be. So I would think if they're committed, they're committed. If they're not committed, I know who I think the team needs more, and that's the power running midfielder, given that they found a couple of very canny small forwards. Hey, one more before I let you go. Would Sean Darcy and Hayden Young be playing AFL this week if you're a Fremantle selector?
Hayden Young definitely is. The more I think about it, the more I think they've got to stick to the plan with Sean Darcy. They've invested a lot of time to get it right. They've sent him overseas. He's got himself in really good nick. I think maybe one more week, and I know it's Richmond, and you've got to be careful with your language in and around that. But, would there be much difference this weekend between Liam Reedy and Sean Darcy, given that he's missed a lot of the pre-season? I don't think there would be. and I'm probably more inclined to stick to the plan. Having said that, I think Justin Longmuir, he is desperate for this to work with Sean Darcy in terms of he's the one that's backed him in. The big contract has come from him. He loves Jackson as the second ruck, so he'd be pretty keen to get him back in, and he said as much in his conference. So I think he comes back in, but if it was me, I'd stick to the plan, give him one more week.
Brilliant stuff from you this morning, Hayes. Thank you very much for joining us on the show, and look forward to your thoughts on the run home later in the day. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Duff. Always a pleasure.